Overnight, tensions escalating as federal immigration agents clash with protesters amid ongoing ICE raids.
I can't breathe.
A cloud of white gas forcing protesters to flee outside a federal building in Minneapolis.
Stay off federal property or you will be arrested.
Amidst the violence, President Trump now threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would give the president the power to deploy U.S. military forces in Minnesota. Generally, the use of federal troops on U.S. soil is prohibited, but the president can invoke the 218-year-old law if requested by governors or if he determines that there is an insurrection. President Lyndon Johnson invoked the Insurrection Act in 1965 to protect civil rights marchers in Selma, Alabama, after the governor refused to protect them. The threat following another violent incident and protests Wednesday night. An ICE agent shooting and wounding Venezuelan national Julio Cesar Sosa Celis, who federal authorities say tried to flee to a nearby home during what officials called a traffic stop. DHS officials allege 2 other people came out of a nearby apartment and attacked the officer with a shovel and a broomstick. That's when officials say the officer fired, quote, a defensive shot to defend his life. DHS officials have not presented evidence to support this, and ABC has not been able to independently verify. The 3 men now in custody. Federal agents deploying tear gas at that scene. The Jackson family caught in the crossfire while driving home from their son's basketball game, causing 3 of their 6 kids to be transported to the hospital.
The ICE agents came forward and they were lined up with their mace.
The family says gas grenades set off the airbags, trapping them inside as gas filled the van. Bystanders helped open the doors. That's when they realized that the infant had stopped breathing.
Having to get my baby mouth to mouth and people pouring milk all over my other kids. I thought I was dying, honestly. And the way I felt, I could imagine how my kids felt because I'm a full-blown grown adult, so I just knew that it was even worse for them.
Now, the president has already threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act several times this year, but whether he actually follows through on that threat here in Minneapolis remains to be seen.
9 days ago, an ICE agent killed Renee Good in Minneapolis. Yesterday morning, Donald Trump posted language that legal experts and civil liberties groups are interpreting as a threat to deploy the U.S. military to Minnesota. And Wednesday night, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the second highest ranking official at the Department of Justice, called Minnesota's governor a terrorist. Here's the timeline of how we got from Renee Good's killing to what critics warn could be military occupation in 9 days. January 7th, 9:30 a.m., ICE agent Jonathan Ross shoots Renee Good through her car window in Minneapolis. He filmed himself doing it. Good's last words on video, quote, "That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you," end quote. Experts examining the footage say the shooting appears inconsistent with lawful self-defense. January 7th through 14th, tens of thousands march in Minneapolis demanding justice. Over 1,000 protests happen nationwide that weekend. The protests continue for multiple days, demanding justice for Good and demanding ICE leave Minneapolis. They're largely peaceful despite widespread anger. Wednesday, January 15th, approximately 6:50 p.m., 10 minutes before Governor Tim Walz's scheduled statewide address, an ICE agent shoots Julio Cesar Sosa Celis, a Venezuelan man, in the leg in North Minneapolis. According to DHS, Sosa Celis fled a traffic stop, crashed his vehicle, fled on foot, and then he and 2 others attacked the ICE officer with a snow shovel and a broom handle, forcing the officer to fire in self-defense. But video obtained by NBC News tells a different story. A woman calling 911 from an apartment, filming from her window with red and blue flashing lights visible outside, tells the dispatcher, quote, "They were chasing my husband for about half an hour. They were trying to crash into him, and he got to the house. And since we closed the door on them, they shot him." After the shooting, federal agents deployed tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbangs on protesters who gathered at the scene. The confrontations lasted into the early morning hours. Federal agents used flashbangs to breach the apartment. This shooting happened exactly 1 week after Renee Good was killed. Wednesday, January 15th, approximately 7 p.m., Governor Tim Walz delivers a statewide address. He says this stopped being about immigration enforcement long ago and has become a campaign of organized brutality against Minnesotans by the federal government. He tells Trump and Kristi Noem to end what he calls the occupation and says they've done enough. Then Walz urges residents to protest loudly and urgently, but also peacefully. He warns against fanning the flames of chaos, saying that's exactly what Trump wants. That same evening, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey releases a statement calling the situation unsustainable. He points out that a huge percentage of shootings in Minneapolis this year have been committed by ICE. He calls ICE conduct disgusting and intolerable. He calls for calm and urges peaceful protest. Both officials, the governor and the mayor, explicitly called for peaceful protest. Both criticized federal operations. Both asked for de-escalation. NBC News would later fact-check what happened next by noting, quote, "It's not clear how the two men are accused of inciting violence. While they have strongly criticized the federal operation, both released statements last night calling for calm and urged protesters to remain peaceful." Wednesday, January 15th, approximately 10 p.m., 3 hours after Governor Walz and Mayor Frey called for peaceful protest, Todd Blanche posts on X. Todd Blanche is the Deputy Attorney General, the second highest ranking official at the United States Department of Justice. He's also Donald Trump's former personal attorney, now using his government position to threaten elected officials. Here's what Blanche posted in full. Quote, "Minnesota insurrection is a direct result of a failed governor and a terrible mayor encouraging violence against law enforcement. It's disgusting. Walz and Frey, I'm focused on stopping you from your terrorism by whatever means necessary. This is not a threat, it's a promise." Let's break that down. Blanche calls the protests in Minnesota an insurrection. He accuses Walz and Frey of encouraging violence against law enforcement, even though both men had just finished explicitly calling for peaceful protest. He calls their actions terrorism. Then he says he's focused on stopping them by whatever means necessary. And he ends with, "This is not a threat, it's a promise." That phrasing appears designed to provide legal cover, since making threats is a crime, while emphasizing he will actually take action. The effect of this statement is to put a sitting governor and mayor on notice that the Deputy Attorney General may pursue them for criticizing federal operations and calling for peaceful protest. Thursday morning, January 16th, Donald Trump posts on Truth Social what critics describe as a threat to invoke military force. Post reads, quote, "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state." End quote. Trump is declaring his intention to invoke the Insurrection Act. This is an 1807 law that allows the president to deploy the U.S. military domestically to enforce federal law or suppress insurrection. It's been used approximately 30 times in U.S. history. It was last invoked in 1992 during the Los Angeles riots after the Rodney King verdict, and that was at the request of California's governor. It hasn't been used without state cooperation since the 1960s during the Civil Rights era, when presidents used it to enforce school integration over the objections of Southern governors. Let's look at Trump's language carefully. He calls Walz and Frey corrupt politicians, though he provides no evidence of corruption. He says they need to obey the law, though he doesn't specify what law they're violating. He calls the protesters professional agitators and insurrectionists. Professional, implying they're being paid. just like Renee Good was smeared as a professional agitator after ICE killed her. Insurrectionists, even though there's no insurrection happening, he says these insurrectionists are attacking the patriots of ICE. He's calling ICE agents who killed Renee Good patriots, and he's saying people protesting her death are attacking them. He claims ICE agents are only trying to do their job, as if killing Good and shooting Sosa Celis is just doing their job. Then Trump falsely claims that many presidents have invoked the Insurrection Act before him. In other contexts, he's claimed nearly half of all presidents have used it. The reality is that only 17 out of 45 presidents, or 37%, have ever invoked it. The president who used it the most was Ulysses S. Grant, who invoked it 6 times during Reconstruction. Trump is lying to normalize what he's threatening to do. Thursday, the White House and DHS double down. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the Insurrection Act is a tool at the president's disposal. She claims, quote, "The president's Truth Social post spoke very loud and clear to Democrats across this country, elected officials who are using their platforms to encourage violence against federal law enforcement officers." End quote. This is false. Walz and Frey both explicitly called for peaceful protest. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem confirms she discussed the Insurrection Act with Trump that morning. When asked if she'd describe the situation as an insurrection, she says, quote, "I describe it as violent and a violation of the law in many places. I discussed with the president this morning several things that we are dealing with under the department and different operations. We did discuss the Insurrection Act. He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that." End quote. This reveals active planning, not just empty threats. Trump and Noem are discussing implementation. House Speaker Mike Johnson piles on Thursday, saying Minnesota is out of control and claiming, quote, "You have local and state leaders who seem to be encouraging violence and all of this madness, and the president's frustrated about it, and so are we." End quote. The entire Republican leadership is unified behind this. So what exactly are Governor Walz and Mayor Frey being accused of? What is the terrorism that Todd Blanche threatened to stop by whatever means necessary? Let's be crystal clear. Walz criticized federal immigration operations as organized brutality. He called the federal presence an occupation. He asked Trump and Noem to end this occupation. He urged residents to protest loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. He warned residents not to fan the flames of chaos. That's it. That's the terrorism. Frey called ICE conduct disgusting and intolerable. He noted that ICE is responsible for a huge percentage of shootings in Minneapolis this year. He called the situation not sustainable. He told ICE to leave Minneapolis. He called for calm and peaceful protest. That's the terrorism. Both officials criticized federal operations, which is protected First Amendment speech. Both called for peaceful protest explicitly and repeatedly. Neither encouraged violence. Neither incited against law enforcement. Neither organized violent resistance. Neither supported attacks on ICE. For this, the Deputy Attorney General accused them of terrorism and threatened to stop them by whatever means necessary. Legal scholars are saying there is no insurrection in Minnesota. Joseph Nunn from the Brennan Center for Justice says none of the criteria for invoking the Insurrection Act are present. He asks, what exactly is the insurrection? There is no insurrection. Are the insurrectionists the people of Minneapolis? He notes that to the extent there's any unrest, it's largely being fomented by the lawlessness and violence of ICE and CBP, not protesters. Stephen Schwinn from the University of Illinois Chicago notes the current images from Minnesota don't appear to rise to the level of insurrection, though courts would likely defer to the president's judgment. Let's put this in context. Approximately 3,000 federal agents are deployed to Minneapolis right now. Over 2,000 ICE officers and agents, hundreds of Border Patrol agents, some DOJ personnel. Minneapolis has approximately 600 police officers total. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. Federal agents outnumber the city's police force 5-to-1. DHS calls this their largest operation to date. Critics describe this as an occupation, and Trump is declaring his intention to add military forces. The justification keeps shifting. Initially, Trump said they were targeting Minnesota because of fraud schemes linked to a daycare program. But the fraud involved mostly U.S. citizens, while ICE targets immigrants, not fraud perpetrators. The fraud investigation became a pretext for immigration raids. Federal agents are using militaristic tactics that sparked the protests. Masked agents in unmarked vehicles, deploying tear gas, pepper spray, flashbangs on protesters, detaining U.S. citizens. Just this week, Christina Rank, a teaching assistant, had her car window broken by ICE at a special needs school. Still in custody Monday with no charges. Ryan Eklund detained 10 hours with visible facial bruises, never charged. Patty O'Keefe, pepper sprayed, windows smashed, released without charges. But while detained, an ICE agent told her about Renee Good. Quote, "You guys gotta stop obstructing us. That's why that lesbian bitch is dead." End quote. Minnesota officials are preparing to fight back. Attorney General Keith Ellison said he's prepared to challenge the Insurrection Act in court if Trump invokes it, arguing Trump triggered the demonstrations by sending thousands of agents. Governor Walz posted asking Trump to turn the temperature down and stop the campaign of retribution. Even while facing terrorism accusations, he's trying to de-escalate. Mayor Frey's spokesperson said Minnesota needs ICE to leave, not an escalation, bringing additional federal troops beyond the 3,000 already here. The ACLU of Minnesota filed a class action lawsuit Thursday, claiming agents violated citizens' Fourth Amendment rights. Senator Tim Kaine warned that Trump wants to use the military as his palace guard and described the administration's actions as lawless. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass said she's deeply alarmed, noting ICE killed Keith Porter Jr. in LA on New Year's Eve and Renee Good in Minneapolis, and warned that invoking the Insurrection Act would bring military intervention into cities. Public opinion opposes what Trump is doing. 52% of Americans said Good's shooting was not justified. 62% believe Trump has overstepped his authority. 51% oppose deploying federal forces to Minnesota. The majority of Americans oppose this. Renee Good's family is taking legal action. Attorney Antonio Romanucci filed a letter demanding preservation of all evidence: Good's car, cell phone video, dashcam video, agent communications. He said the family cannot be certain they'll get the truth from a federal government investigation alone. The family is conducting its own investigation. Trump has made similar declarations before. In June 2025, during Los Angeles protests against ICE. In October, saying he'd invoke the act if he deemed it necessary. During his first term, he considered using it during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis, but ultimately decided against it. Now he's declaring his intention to use it in the same city after his own agents killed someone. The escalation is visible. Tuesday, he posted in all capital letters, quote, "Reckoning and retribution is coming," end quote. The language is about revenge, not justice. Vice President J.D. Vance laid groundwork last week, vowing to crack down on what he described as a broader left-wing network supposedly organized around attacking immigration enforcement. He offered no evidence such a network exists. He claimed Renee Good was part of it, with no evidence. The effect of this rhetoric was to build a narrative that protesters are part of an organized conspiracy, creating justification for describing them as insurrectionists. Here's what civil liberties advocates argue this pattern reveals. Step 1. Have your agents kill a U.S. citizen. That happened January 7th when ICE agent Jonathan Ross killed Renee Good. Step 2. When people protest the killing, crack down on the protests. Federal agents deployed tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbangs. They detained U.S. citizens. They shot another person a week later. Step 3. Accuse elected officials who criticize you of terrorism. Todd Blanche did that Wednesday night, declaring he would stop Governor Walz and Mayor Frey by whatever means necessary for calling for peaceful protest. Step 4. Declare your intention to deploy the military. Trump did that Thursday morning, saying he needs to protect ICE agents from insurrectionists. Throughout all of this, the claims keep inverting reality. ICE agents who kill citizens are called patriots. People protesting the killing are called insurrectionists. Asking for peaceful protest is called terrorism. Criticizing federal operations is called encouraging violence. Governor Walz literally said, quote, "We cannot fan the flames of chaos," end quote. And for that, the Deputy Attorney General called him a terrorist. And notice the comparison Trump won't acknowledge. He pardoned over 1,500 people who participated in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He calls them hostages and patriots. 140 officers were injured during that attack. It was actual political violence targeting the certification of an election. But people protesting after ICE killed Renee Good, those people are insurrectionists who need to be put down with military force. The people who actually committed insurrection get pardons. The people protesting a killing get threatened with military occupation. The second shooting on Wednesday reveals the pattern continuing. DHS claims their agent was ambushed and fired in self-defense, just like they claim Jonathan Ross fired in self-defense when he killed Renee Good. But the 911 call from Julio Cesar Sosa Celis' wife tells a different story. She says agents chased her husband for about half an hour. She says they were trying to crash into him. She says they shot him after the family closed the door on them. This mirrors the Renee Good case, where DHS claims she weaponized her vehicle to attack the agent. But the video shows Ross filming himself, standing to the side of her car, shooting through the window. When DHS makes claims about self-defense, we have strong reason to doubt them based on what happened with Renee Good. What happens next depends on whether Trump actually invokes the act. Noam confirmed she discussed it with him Thursday morning, indicating this is active consideration, not just political rhetoric. If he invokes it, military forces would deploy to Minneapolis. Ellison has said he'll sue. The ACLU has already filed suit. If he doesn't invoke immediately, his declarations and Blanche's statements suggest continued pressure, reckoning and retribution, as Trump put it. Blanche's promise to stop Walz and Frey by whatever means necessary remains undefined. ICE operations continue, and based on the pattern established, additional confrontations are possible. The stakes extend beyond Minnesota. Other cities are watching. Critics warn that if Trump can declare his intention to deploy military forces for protests against a killing, he can do it anywhere. If the Deputy Attorney General can accuse a governor of terrorism for calling for peaceful protest, legal experts argue he can do that to any elected official. The questions raised are whether federal agents can kill citizens without accountability, whether people can protest those actions, whether elected officials can criticize federal operations without facing terrorism accusations, and whether the military can be deployed against American cities when people demand answers. The timeline establishes a pattern critics describe as retaliation. January 7th, ICE kills Renee Good. January 7th through 14th, people protest demanding justice. January 15th, ICE shoots another person during the second week of protests. January 15th, the Deputy Attorney General accuses the governor and mayor of terrorism for asking protesters to remain peaceful. January 16th, the president declares his intention to deploy military forces. The effect of this sequence, civil liberties groups argue, is to punish demands for accountability, following Renee Good's killing. And that ICE agent's comment to Patty O'Keefe connects these events. Quote, "You guys gotta stop obstructing us. That's why that lesbian bitch is dead." End quote. That statement reveals how at least some ICE agents understand Renee Good's death in relation to monitoring their operations. They're using her killing in statements to other observers. The agent was comfortable saying this because he apparently believed there would be no consequences for making such a statement to a detained U.S. citizen. When the Deputy Attorney General accuses elected officials of terrorism for criticizing federal operations, when the President declares his intention to deploy military forces against protesters, when ICE agents reference a woman's killing while using homophobic slurs, critics argue this demonstrates law enforcement operating without meaningful oversight. Legal scholar Joseph Nunn asked the essential question: what exactly is the insurrection? There is no insurrection. People are protesting because an ICE agent killed Renee Nicole Good 9 days ago. They're demanding justice and accountability. Nunn noted that to the extent there's violence, it's primarily being perpetrated by ICE and CBP, not protesters. And now the president is declaring his intention to deploy the military against American citizens for exercising their First Amendment rights to protest and their elected officials' First Amendment rights to criticize federal operations. Civil liberties groups warn this is what it looks like when executive power operates without constraint, when federal agents can use lethal force and face limited accountability, when the Deputy Attorney General can accuse governors of terrorism for protected speech, when the President can declare intentions to deploy military forces for political purposes, when nearly half a century of precedent about not using the Insurrection Act without state cooperation can potentially be swept aside, when the framing inverts so that the agents involved in killings are called patriots and the people who protest are called insurrectionists. 9 days from killing to military deployment declarations. 9 days from Renee Good's death to Donald Trump declaring his intention to deploy troops against the people demanding justice for her. 9 days from what experts say appears to be an unjustified shooting to the Deputy Attorney General accusing peaceful protest of terrorism. That's the timeline. That's the pattern critics warn follows an authoritarian playbook. And that's what legal experts say happens when accountability mechanisms fail and power operates without effective limits. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.